My name is Marty Hilton, and I'm president of Architecture Sarasota. A critical part of our mission is to support good design that addresses critical issues impacting the Sarasota region and beyond. These issues include affordable housing, coastal resilience, and sustainable urban development that embodies the aspirations of the community while retaining its character and sense of place. Architecture Sarasota is pleased to launch Downtown Sarasota, Hindsight, Insight, and Foresight, a 4-part speaker series conceived to spark a community-wide dialogue about the future of downtown Sarasota. Sarasota is experiencing a period of rapid growth and transformation. Here at Architecture Sarasota, we believe this series will provide a forum for residents, stakeholders, and community members to come together to understand better how we got where we are, what's happening now, and how Sarasota might evolve in the decades to follow. Renowned experts Andres Duany, David Hull, Mitchell Silver, and Victor Dober will address vital topics including Sarasota 2020, the current master plan and how it was developed 2 decades ago, the macro level and local forces impacting the development of downtown, case studies from other locations, and best practices for urban planning and design. The first installment is Andres Duany, founding principal of DPZ Co-Design, the consultants who developed Sarasota 2020, our current master plan, in the late 1990s. Mr. Duany will share with us how that plan evolved, explore some of the key principles, and critique how it's been implemented over the last 2 decades. So Mr. Duany, he's quite the draw. He said not to read his bio, and I could just say Andres. It's like Cher or Madonna, or he doesn't need a last name. Couple of things I have learned about him. One is that he is extremely interested in manufactured housing, and if you don't know, that is my background. I'm either the prince of trailers or the bastard child of architecture, depending on how you feel about trailers. My father's been inducted in the National Manufactured Housing Institute Hall of Fame in Elkhart, Indiana. So if you go to the museum, I don't know why you would, but it's there, and his picture's on the wall. So Andres and I, we thought we were going to be talking about Sarasota. At lunch, we talked for an hour and a half about trailers, much to Howard's chagrin, but we had a good time. And I think that, who knows, my family might hook up with Andres, and maybe we'll do an Andres Duany, help him with his trailers. The other thing I learned about him, and then I'll get off the stage, is I don't think he'll ever retire, but maybe as a second career, he really loves the Waffle House and applied to be a manager. Is that not true, of the Waffle House? Apparently the managerial program was a little too long. So who knows, sometime in the future, whether he's designing and redesigning cities, you may see him making waffles at a Waffle House near you. With that, I'm gonna turn it over, Andres Duany.
No one knows about the Waffle House. But once I realized that Marty was really a good old boy, and we started on trailers, we just went right on to Waffle House. And actually, I was interested because it's such an incredibly well-run company. And I actually love success wherever it appears. I just pursue it, regardless of where it is to be found. And that is the one place I know where people of the middle class and lower middle class are really, really comfortable. And it isn't just housing them, it's like where they feel at home and basically what their social circle is. And that's why I wanted to find out more about the company, and I really did apply. My assistant applied, and I thought I'd be rejected because I was overqualified. I was just too old. Because they said, we'd like to keep our managers for 20 years. And once we train you in the fine art of Waffle House expertise, we want to keep you for 20 years. I don't believe I've ever been rejected before by an institution. So that was pretty cool that I was able to tell you that. I got a mug for applying. Not that easy to get. So it turns out it was 23 years ago. By the way, I've not been focusing on Sarasota, needless to say, all these years. But once I was invited, thank you very much for the invitation and taking care of me and having such an interesting 2 days. Once I began focusing very slowly, I found the old report, etc., and things have become more clear, because that was 23 years ago. And one of the things that I distinctly remember when I was, we didn't really interview, out of the blue, we were said, come here, we're in trouble. And would you come and help us with, actually it wasn't so much in trouble as we have troublemakers, okay? It's not the same thing. And when I was invited, I have to say, I felt really, really honored. And the reason is that I was brought up with Sarasota being an extraordinarily famous place architecturally. And I was surprised how many people don't know this, but there was a time in the 50s when there were no historians of architecture. That's a very late profession. And the only historian at the time was Henry Russell Hitchcock, who taught all the subsequent historians like Vincent Scully, etc. And he said around 1960, the most important, or either interesting or important, the most important architecture in the world is being done today in Sarasota. Okay? By the one historian in America, the most important in the world. Okay? And that was, I don't know how many of you don't know that famous statement, but that museum that you have of architecture is really serious. Now, another little anecdote. Last night, there was a very nice dinner, and I was, with regular folk, and I knew I had to sort of pitch it. Don't frighten them with architecture. Don't frighten them with architectural sophistication, because it's. And it dawned on me pretty slowly that everybody on the table was really sophisticated. And then I would listen to them, and it was just amazing. And then we upped the game, and we stayed there till very late for Sarasota, something like 9 o'clock. The waiter got very nervous. And the reason there was an amazing generation of architects here, which are increasing in fame, and there's actually one of them is with us, Frank Folsom Smith, right here, who I've really kept track of. We're friends. And the other one is Carl Abbott. And you know that Norman Foster is pretty much, if not one of the most highly regarded architects in the world, and he accepted an invitation. He would not have accepted Naples or Boca Raton or Orlando. And I think it's the magic, architectural magic of Sarasota that brought him here. They say he's a friend of Carl Abbott, as classmates, but that's not enough. It's got to be, crossing the Atlantic as an old person is tough going. And he's coming here, and that's enormous, and that's part of the great prestige of this place. So just want to know what I think. So we got the invitation, I was honored. We'd done just a very few master plans downtown, and we can talk about our way of doing things. And when he says, we're in trouble, which you always hear. American cities are in trouble. You want to catch them. I sometimes feel like an emergency room doctor. Like it's too late, or you never had much of a life. What am I supposed to restore you to? You never had health. Okay, there's nothing to go on. But it was Sarasota, and when I arrived here, the trouble was, no kidding, that people in condos were complaining about street noise. That sounds familiar. And it was really nothing, but it was kind of interesting that this place was such a princess with a P under that was considered trouble. There's street noise. Well, that's an honor, is to have a nightlife. Most people would kill for a nightlife. I mean, entire towns in the Midwest and the West evacuate. They're young because there's no nightlife. They've got to go to Chicago. Right? Then you had a nightlife, which is actually represented by people staying up late and talking and actually having music. So because that is so easily solved, oh, by the way, as you know, that's still the complaint. And the solution is so easy, which is just don't amplify the music. It's the amplified music. Just say the old way, etc., and it just goes down very quickly. And I can explain why that is, etc., the reverberation, so forth, but that's it. Now, I don't expect you to take that suggestion now. You didn't then. But because we said, okay, now that we've solved that problem and we still have a whole budget left, what do we do? And at those days, we actually were, our firm pretty much was I really, really apologize, but we were kind of the inventors of the public process, the public participation process. But it turns, there was reasons for that, there wasn't a political problem. NIMBYs did not exist. Okay, the term didn't exist. We explained what the term was, and well into the late 90s, not in your backyard, people didn't know what that was. And there are reasons for that. People still look forward to the future. There was in America, my mother, she just loved the future. The mall is coming, the new subdivision is coming, etc. When I came to Florida in 1976, the developers were heroes. You did not have to apologize, your children didn't disown you. Developers were the heroes. They're the ones that built Florida. And now that's changed very much. We're suspicious of developers. They make everything worse. We ran across this one problem, but we also, and I should say one thing about charrettes. John Nolan, who designed the pretty sophisticated plan for Sarasota, he did 22 towns in Florida. Florida was very late in development. And as a result, the planning is excellent. It wasn't like Mormons laying out, 15 grids in, a year. Or the very careless towns of the West, the crude grids that ignored. Florida from the beginning, because it was post-war, had very, very sophisticated planning. And not just John Nolan, who did 22 towns. John Nolan was the most famous planner of his time. And the way he would arrive to a place, he would arrive alone. He would actually talk to the people he needed to talk to. Just perhaps the town founder, who was usually alive, the important people that ran the business, the railway, what do you want, how can we help you to come in, the ports people. He didn't say, y'all come in, tell us what you think. Okay, it was quasi-judicial, like a judge. You would say, I speak to all the people I need to speak to. He got all the information, and he would go back to Boston, do the plan, and mail it back. And they were generally implemented. And if it hadn't been for the Depression and the war, these beautiful towns would have proliferated. We would have had 22 or more absolutely gorgeous towns of the highest quality. Some of the most finished were Palm Beach, Coral Gables, the vintage of Santa Barbara and Santa Fe, like very, very fine planning. And you got one of those plans. And you can see you must all know the famous drawing with the arc on the bay. So I came here, and what had happened is, this is a story you don't need to know, but eventually suburbia betrayed its promise. Okay, what you were supposed to get is a new place, suburbia. The promise of suburbia was a new place in nature with easy parking and flowing traffic. And it's exactly what happened. What didn't happen. Suburbia destroyed nature and created the most hideous parking, and the basic presentation is the parking lot, which is completely antisocial. And the NIMBYism comes from the fact that suburbia, suburban sprawl, has actually made life worse for everyone. So when I find a NIMBY, the first thing I grant them is you are right to fear the future. Okay? Because actually in your lifetime, things have generally gotten worse. And to hear Americans actually say, in only one field, I don't want progress, right? Because in everything else, we got to beat the Germans, we have to beat the Japanese, we have to beat the Chinese. Progress, 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 growth, growth, growth. But when it comes to urbanism, the less the better. And that's a result of a completely dysfunctional system, which is suburban sprawl. I'm going to just say one thing about suburban sprawl. That's where the NIMBYism comes from. Okay, it's like when you can have a very sophisticated planning team and all you hear about is traffic all day. Traffic and unaffordability. And so, if you're very sophisticated, you say social isolation, But mostly it's traffic, And so when I came here, that's what I was expected. I didn't expect that. But nevertheless, what I saw is a town full of promise. Remember, we'd only been asked to solve one problem. But we said, we got a few extra days here with a big team, so what else do we do? And the planning department was in very good hands in those days, probably now also, although I knew them better then. And we marched through the other issues. But they weren't repairing problems. They were just saying, what are the potentials that are not fulfilled? Do you understand? It wasn't, most other towns really do have problems. And one of the things I said here that wasn't so popular, it should be, is like, what's your problem? I kept saying, like, what's your problem? Street noise, whatever it is. And then we discovered that actually the access to the bay was a problem and a great disappointment, that you had a public art problem, where do we put them, but it wasn't real problems. But apparently, we did a report, which is there, and it inspired a lot of, there's technology in there, there's tech that really does work, codes that make a predictable environment. But what I'm told is that it just inspired people to do things right. And so I keep saying, no, I shouldn't have credit for this. I didn't do that. It says, yes, you did. I said, no, I didn't. What happened is that this is one of these places that is kind of blessed with health. It just is. It's been from the beginning. It was good ideas like the Sarasota school, the islands, the St. Armand's Circle, the boulevard in front, your good luck in having your town. Not everybody has their town center on the water. Like poor old Vero Beach has its town center not on the water. It's like a mile in. Okay, now why did that happen? Well, the railway did it. So you're very lucky to do that. And I think you really built on it. You really built on it. I came 10 years ago. I was invited, 15 years ago, I was invited back. And there was a lot of, one of the bigger problems at the time is that nobody wanted to slow down the traffic downtown, which is absolutely essential for pedestrians. If you have cars moving quickly, you don't like to be next to them. You're not going to be killed by them. It's just incredibly unpleasant to have cars moving fast. And at the time, and I said, well, why didn't you, that's one of the easiest things to do, on-street parking, narrow the lanes, that's easy, it's paint, it's often paint. And what happened is that some person said, made this, it was like a brilliant play, it says, well, and listen to this, okay, I couldn't make this up. If I have a heart attack on the island, I want my ambulance to get to the hospital quickly. One person. Talk about the tyranny of a minority. But it's the kind of thing you say, oh my God, life and death, and possibly lawsuits, and we were warned. And so there was this, and I was told, really, one person said that? Actually, and then that really gave me a bad impression. Like, really, you stop this because one person said that? Democracy isn't working, was my idea. And then I come back and I said, yeah, okay, yeah, Sarasota, very nice. And I'm so impressed with what I saw. I'm so incredibly impressed. So I wasn't expecting it. In fact, it dawned on me slowly as I walked and walked and walked. You people, when I was in the room in meetings, and I've had meetings continually, you were not telling me how good it was. Everybody was trying to find something to complain about. And it's just nothing, none of the complaints stand, okay? They don't. But when I went out and I saw the extent, for example, of Main Street, the extent, it just really, you're gonna go on like this for block after block after block of wonderful, socially attractive retail. Do you know, people get famous when they have 2 blocks of retail. And you have 4. The famous Winter Park has 2 blocks and it got famous. Hell, Denver, once it got 2 blocks, it became famous. It doesn't take, there's such a scarcity of walkable, sociable public space in America that with 2 blocks you become famous, and you probably have 6 or 8 blocks. And really good stuff, really good. And I was very impressed by that. That's Main Street. And I think the other street is Palm, just outside here. Is that called Palm? And I was thinking about one more thing out there. When I was there last night at Palm, I felt the sea breeze. Okay? That you're used to maybe, but I'm not. Okay? Miami is much more closed. It's much more closed. And the sea breeze does not go from Ocean Drive to Washington Avenue. The breeze doesn't penetrate. Now, I don't know whether that's exactly why that is, whether it's because the buildings are further apart here, which is something you might consider, is actually making sure that the buildings don't touch. When they come together, don't touch. And so the breeze gets in. Or maybe it's something about the direction of the breeze that John Nolan figured out. But that was delightful last night. That was really beautiful. And the beauty wasn't just nature. The beauty was that you guys got the lights right. And that's incredibly rare. I don't know who chooses the lights in the rest of the world, but it's mostly about making people look bad, as far as I can tell. Ruin their skin color. It was beautifully selected lights. The landscaping was really, by the way, the landscaping is not normal here. In Florida, it's different. Florida is much more northeastern with the line trees. You have a kind of very picturesque, lower, Everglade-y kind of landscape. In your main streets, which reminds me of California. It's not like the East Coast towns. This is not what's happening in Palm Beach. It's not what's happening in Coral Gables. It's not what's happening in Miami Beach. There's something special about it. And you probably don't notice because it's the air you breathe, right? But I noticed it and I loved it because it had character. And I think that as you make subsequent decisions about how you plant trees all in a row, because you can very easily get distracted and saying, well, we just need trees up and down the line and they all have to be shade trees and all this. Be careful, because you've developed somehow something that is much more of your own character. See, now you're developing character, and it should be noticed and supported. Like, don't try to be like other places, because the other places are other places. And you've kind of stumbled across this pretty cool landscape here. It's incredibly picturesque for a downtown. The streets wiggle, and you don't put 2 bushes that are the same. It's a little bit of the Everglades wandered in, and that's really good. Okay, so that's something to take care of. Whoever's choosing your lights, keep it up. Whoever's doing it, because it changes sometimes when the regime changes, the consultants change, and they have to make their mark. And I think you're onto something that's really good. And I saw that. I saw that on. By the way, if I had just been to meetings, I wouldn't have known that Sarasota was this good. Do you understand? Like, I sit in a room hour after hour, people trying to find something to complain about, and then I go out and say, wow, you really have to check what you hear. And if you know me, you know that if you were doing a lousy job, I would tell you. So when I say you're doing a good job, trust me. Okay? It doesn't mean you won't blow it. But there's another thing too. You can also keep going. And before I drop this, I cannot believe how horrible the area from the what's the street called that's right on the bay? What's that street? What? It's 41. Look at that, 41. Okay? Yeah, 41. Do you know John Nolan? That was a waterfront boulevard. Have you seen the one in Nice? Have you seen the one in Havana? Have you seen the one in Rio? Have you seen yours? It is such a collection of incoherent junk, okay? From the first condo to the first parking lot to an incredibly decrepit landscape, okay, they can't decide whether it's up or down, to a highway, to parking, to God knows what is on, because nobody's ever been to the other side, including me. Okay, that whole thing, which is probably the width of more than a football field, if not the length, has got to be coherently designed from beginning to end. Okay, just decide some aspect, because right now it's an accretion, generally, of bad ideas. There isn't a single good idea between the last condo and the water. And bad ideas are bad, but when you have a whole collection of them. So I think that actually the great aspiration of the next generation is not to tinker with things that are going well, which is there's a tendency to keep tinkering. Like the things, the complaints I hear about are tiny. Oh my God, the balconies are too, whatever. Little things. Do one big thing in the next 25 years. And you're going to have to hammer at it because everybody wants to protect their parking space, and somebody loves some frog that lives there, this species, and the sailboat guys want to, have you ever carried a case of beer to a boat? Everybody's going to have all this stuff going on, okay, reason not to do it. And I do have a proposal about the public process, okay, how to handle this. Because I've learned a few things since 23 years ago. And I need to go back a little bit. As I said, the public process did not exist. Okay? We did it for efficiency. The reason we brought our office here is so we wouldn't have to go back and forth and back and forth. You'd have a meeting, go back and work, drive all the way across the state, present, get it wrong, go back to the office, fix it, drive over, present, get it wrong, 5 times. So at one point, I realized just bring the office over, because the amount of time traveling, et cetera, and that's how the charrettes began. And then we got very organized about who do we speak to. We speak to the elected officials, because they were elected to make decisions, right? And we speak not so much to the neighbors in those days, but we speak to the people who actually have been selected to make decisions. The professionals in the planning department, okay? The elected officials. They make decisions. That's why we have a democracy. We elect people, they make decisions. You don't like it, get rid of it. Okay? By the way, there's some countries that are doing an excellent job, such as France and Germany and generally Europe. And what happens is when somebody gets elected to office, they get to govern. Okay? During their time in office. They're not running a continual poll on everything. What does everybody think? Bring them all in. Because what happens is nothing happens when you do that. And if you say, well, Paris is looking very sleek, or, I love Italy, all these people come back and say, how do you think that happened? They trust their elected. That's why a democracy works from one election to the next, and you don't have to re-elect a person. But this idea that you run a constant polling environment, that goes all the way to the president now. The president doesn't do anything without running a poll, right? Happens locally. And so the first thing that I would do, and I know it's kind of hopeless, so I'm going to give you something that includes that, because I've learned. There is the way charrettes, okay, since that time, the NIMBYs have become empowered. Now here, it was the first time in my life that I actually met organized NIMBYs, and it's because somebody had the mailing list, or the phone list, the mailing list of a condo. And I said, oh my God, they can actually bring 200 people out and pack one condo can pack the meeting hall, terrify everybody, and bore them to death, which is even worse. Like anybody who has any brains gets out of there because it's just repetitive. Like we really don't want X. Oh yes, we really don't want X. Okay, and you can say, well, speak only 3 minutes. It's still very, very painful. So we've developed a method that I learned in Australia. And it goes like this. He says, actually, it had to do, I was in Perth, Australia, and there's a beach that has all the wealthy people. It's like Malibu, right? All the wealthy people, like that. And they had built a public clubhouse in front of all the wealthy people. Not just beach access, but a huge clubhouse. So I spoke to the planning director and I said, do you run a democracy? Like, how do you shove that down people's throats? And he said, no. We run a democracy. You don't run a democracy. And she explained to me that a democracy, to be effective, requires a random sample. Okay, it's a random sample. And we in the United States empower only the neighbors. And she said, that is actually a vested interest. The neighbor is a vested interest. And in this country, the closer you are to the issue, I live right across from that school. And I'm the closest person to that school, and the traffic's gonna be bad, and therefore no. And you say, oh, that's the closest neighbor. And so the school goes out to the suburbs. Okay? So that is not, when actually we empower, and sometimes we actually, I don't know whether you do this, you invite everybody within 1,000 feet. As if that were a random sample. It isn't, it's a vested interest. Just like we all know a developer is a vested interest, and we treat them as such, they're not a regular citizen, they have a vested interest. The neighbors have a vested interest. So we developed a system that works like this. The first thing, you have to prepare 5 plans. It's called scenario planning. And it has to be a pretty big issue, not a little thing, okay? The first thing you must do is what happens, you need to make a study of what happens if we do nothing. What happens if we don't modify the code? What happens if we don't build a school? What happens if we don't build a park, okay? You always have to give people the right to know that when they say I'm against anything, leave Vero. And by the way, I don't think it's possible to say leave Sarasota. You don't say really, tell me the truth. You don't say, oh, I love small town Sarasota, okay? Because if you do, you're blind, okay? This is a high-rise place already, okay? So I hope you don't say, I like the old Sarasota, it's gone. It's something else that can be really great, but it ain't old Sarasota. But this whole idea of what happens if we do nothing, can we actually just remain a little town? No, you're not a little town. You're 100 years old. You're 100 years old, okay? Stop trying to be a teenager, let alone a kindergartner, okay? Just get a suit. Stop wearing short pants, okay? Just get a suit. So, but you have to tell people the consequences of not doing this are these. And that is not just, you really make a report. This is what you lose in taxes, this is what you lose in possibility, this, whatever. The second thing you do is you speak only to the neighbors. Within that, those neighbors, it depends on the site, but within 1,000 feet or whatever, you speak only to the neighbors. And you say, this is what the neighbors want. They have a right to speak, they have the right to say, but they are not the community as a whole. They're the neighbors. And you do a whole plan based on what the neighbors want. The whole thing, I'll draw it up. This is what you want, this is what you want, the manatees are here, right? Whatever, the parking's there, whatever you want. We just draw it up. The third plan is what does the community as a whole want? The random sample, which is the true democracy. And it may or may not coincide. But for example, let me just get into hot water here, okay? If you ask all the people in the condos whether they want that road fixed in front, that mess to get better, they say, no, I would rather have the mess I know than the mess you're gonna make. So I'm against anything. Don't change anything. Fine, that's your plan, okay? But you don't represent, that whole waterfront belongs to all of Sarasota, right? Is that not obvious? Is that not obvious that the waterfront belongs to all of Sarasota? In fact, the downtown belongs to all of Sarasota. The high school belongs to all of Sarasota. There are certain things that actually, and so you do a third plan, which is what Sarasota as a whole wants. The fourth plan is what did the elected officials who were elected to make decisions, not to hide behind polls and planners making this, covering for them. And don't forget the experts you have in your planning department that you treat as if they know nothing, when it actually is the elected official that knows nothing, okay? Because it's not like you take a little test like they do, this is not like the Chinese imperial exam that you have to pass the major test before you join government. Like, do you really know anything about planning? Do you really know about the code? Do you know about parking? Do you know about people just spouting off about parking, and I'm sitting in this chair, therefore I know about parking, or, you don't, actually. And that's why you have professionals running the planning department. It's not a political appointment, it's an expertise appointment. And you basically give them rights. So the fourth plan that I do is what do the elected officials and the experts want? Okay, and They're not used to being asked, actually, neither the elected officials nor the planning department. They're in shock. Really? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, oh, really? Yes, you sit down in the sunshine law one at a time, and we decide what you want, and I'll draw it. And then the fourth one is, oh, by the way, how about, remember me? You hired me to do your planning. Anybody interested in what I have to say? Because sometimes the planner's like the waiter taking orders. Would you like your hamburger with pickles? And then you write notes. Yes, okay. What else would you like? Anybody else have an order? Rare? How'd you like your bun? No. Actually, we know about planning. That's why you hire us. Now, what I do at that time, I've got this incredible know-how of the good ideas of every group, right? So our fifth plan is the plan that it just culls all the good ideas. And then I present all of them. Vote, 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 vote. And the fifth plan always wins because it's actually the collection of the good ideas. But everybody's very clear that they've been listened to. Nobody listened to me. Yes, we did. It's plan 2. Okay? You see what I'm saying? And that works really well because right now we spend a huge amount of effort and I've already heard, oh my God, are you really going to, what are you going to? So I would say that because this is very new, by the way, I've only done this once in Vero on the waterfront. This has only been done once. If you actually institute this, and I'm not proposing I do it, okay? But if you institute this as a method in which at least you say, what do the neighbors think? Come up and tell us. And then by the way, in Australia, what they do is they use the jury pool to find a random sample of all places. They say, and the way they do it is they actually send out 500 invitations. They come in, jury pool, you show up, and you say, we want 200 people to volunteer for 3 meetings and 2 hearings. Okay, 3 meetings, 3 professional meetings and 2 hearings. And then maybe 100 come. And then they show up. And the elected officials then have cover. Because it isn't just the neighbors from the condo commandos that came down. It's actually the community as a whole. And so you can understand the intelligence of that, of actually having somebody decide, this is our waterfront. It doesn't belong to the condos or to the boaters or to the people having the park there. All the vested interests. We've heard you, boaters. Yes, here's your 6-pack. It's going to be right here, and whatever. But you basically run a democracy. And you can still choose that doesn't mean you don't choose for the neighbors. Maybe the neighbors are so badly affected that you actually come up and say, yeah, the neighbors are right. We can't do this. Or the guy with the heart attack, in Sarasota, which by the way, I told them, by the way, you're not going to be around by the time this plan's implemented. That was, said, don't worry. This is going to take so long. Do you remember my saying that? That was popular. Yeah. So you still have the choice. The elected officials still have the choice, but it's really rational and you get the feeling, well, democracy did work because everybody was heard and it wasn't this big gumbo of everything. Okay? So I would suggest that if you do that, and particularly if you institutionalize it, use your planning department to actually collect the information, you would actually be pioneering in that regard. It's probably your greatest problem. Your greatest problem. Okay, so that's new. The other thing that I'm going to bring up, and you kind of brought it up, but I think not enough. The planning you do, if you consider this 23 years ago, right? That's a generation. I mean, I know people that you weren't born. Okay, that's the kind of thing you can do. This is very long-term planning. You really have to privilege the young in your public discussion because it's really for them. They're going to see the change. You're not. You're going to see the change. And the young, unfortunately, if you come up with a proposition, does anybody have a say? The old people come up, and they're the ones that tend to say no. And then the young who are back there who actually bothered to show up, roll their eyes. I see them. They roll their eyes and leave. Oh, God, the old people again. I always ask, who's the youngest person in the room? They speak first. That's it. It's very simple. You have a hearing, the youngest person in the room speaks first. And the second, and the third youngest, and the fourth, and the fifth, and sixth. What happens, because the young tend to say yes, and they're more risk takers, and because it is really their world in planning, In planning, it's their world. They set an ethos of yes that's very hard for the older people to say no after that has been set up. And I see that all the time. I see that all the time. It's like magic. Because you're going to stand up and really be the ogre in the room after all the cute young people have said that they really want to swim in the fountain. And you're going to say, I want to swim naked in the fountain. Okay, who's going to say no? Really? Is anybody that uncool? No. So that's what I'm talking about. Just really, and this isn't just a trick. It really is for the young that we do the planning. Okay, it really is. It's amazing what a long-term endeavor this is. That's another thing that you should do in the hearings, and that works very well. Now, you still have to persuade the young to show up because they're so cynical. It also has to do with the fact, et cetera, okay? Now, about your town center. The young pioneer the town centers. Last night, the young pioneer the town center, they're very young, and it's because if you don't have a nightlife, they go to the big city. If you don't have a nightlife, they'll go to Chicago. They'll drive 3 hours to Chicago. You will lose them to Chicago. You will lose them to Miami. You will lose them to places that have a nightlife. And the reason is that they have to find a mate. And the more hours that they have to sample the genetic material, they instinctively know, okay? So you can't just say, oh yeah, well we shut down at 7. That's 1 hour of sampling. So it really is for them, and it has to make sense for them. They are here already, which actually just gratified me. They're actually here already on Main Street. Really cool, very cool. But they're not living here. And that is the next thing. They need to live here. And of course, they don't have the wherewithal. They can't pay for what's happened to the real estate here. And there's one way that we've that's very new. The formulas don't work that well. If I give you, my God, you have a rule, you're considering a rule here that says, if I double your density, you give me 15% of the additional units. They're going to be 80% of the median income. Can you imagine that formula? First, we double it, from 50 to 100, right? And then you give us 15, and then you have to qualify with the median income, which, by the way, you can cheat in 2 seconds. Some of the richest people I know actually they give up their job for a year and they qualify. It happens all the time in New York. That doesn't work. There's one thing that there's a chance. The reason that people, when you say, I have 50 units to the acre, I'm going to give you an additional whatever, okay? The problem is that the apartments are all large and luxurious because they're much more profitable, right? You sell by the square foot. If you're capped at 50 units to the acre, you make much more money if each of the apartments has 2,000 square feet. It's just automatic. So what you do, if for example, you say you can have 50 if you do 3-bedroom units. You can have 75 if you do 2-bedroom units. You can have 100 if you do 1-bedroom units, and 150 if you do studios. Same amount of square footage being sold. Do you get it? Do you see what I'm saying? Same profit, same thing, but what happens is, of course, you've got to unhinge it from parking. That's another thing I want to talk about. But that actually getting all the units to be smaller. And by the way, they can be just as cool. In fact, the smaller, the cooler they have to be. It just has to be clever as can be. The cabinets have to be great, okay? But it's just, I think affordability should be all private sector, no subsidy, no formulas, no anything. Just get them to, please. We're incentivizing only big units by capping the thing. So that's one thing you should do. The other thing, which is an idea we kind of came up with walking around, you have an X5 and dime downtown, right? You have that? Okay. So there's something, you're considering transfer of development rights. If you own a nice historic building downtown that's one story, you don't get to win the lottery, right, with the 25-story building. So you, who are really the good guy that owns the department, the beautiful building, are the loser of the lottery. It's so unfair. So transfer development rights, which were pioneered in New York, say, if you don't get to build the 20-story buildings, you can sell it to a developer. Sell the rights. So you keep the same number of units downtown, but you transfer the development rights. And they pay you. That's old. That's how they preserve the churches in New York and so forth, usually churches and civic buildings. I would add two things here that are different. One is that if you do get that bonanza, which at the moment they don't have, you understand, if you own that five and dime, you haven't won the lottery yet. And the city shouldn't be giving prizes, lottery prizes, to people who are not expecting them. So when you say, I'm going to give you a TDR, let's say that department store, let's say, has a potential TDR of 25 units. If you get that money, which is, we have created that funds out of nothing, out of thin air. We, the council, have created the profit of 25 or 30 units out of thin air. For you, you have to use at least half of them to renovate your building. Don't just pocket it and get out of there. You understand? And that is something that's new. You actually put that and say, okay, you renovate your historic building, get your church to be beautiful again, restored. And that would be fantastic. So you get something back for the gift that you have created. You've created something out of thin air. And the other thing is, if you get those units from TDRs, they've got to be small. Okay, you're not building the 3 bedrooms that hardly anybody uses anyway, okay? Those buildings that you're essentially buying, probably for cheap, you're not paying properly for them. You just make them for young people. The young people stay up at night. The young people actually will replace all of us here. And you have to keep them that way. And by the way, that's permanent affordable housing, because it's not about subsidy or administration. It's always, now it may not be, it'll never be, not in Sarasota. It's really never going to be affordable. It's just going to be much less expensive. And I think stop talking affordable. It's actually, or for school teachers and firemen, because you're going to put me to sleep, okay? It's just less expensive housing. Okay, less expensive housing is what we're talking about. Just less expensive, and the kids will find out how to do it. They may double up or whatever they do, but they figure it out if you make less expensive housing, which actually means smaller houses. And other cities are getting very, very good. You see them in the cool magazines, like the incredibly cool little apartments everywhere, and everybody loves them, and they're not being punished, for being young. It's actually very cool. In fact, it's probably cooler than your big apartment, okay, which they have to pack with multiple people or you have empty. So that's a suggestion that's actually kind of new. I mean, we're developing this stuff right now because the affordable housing thing has been extraordinary. I want to say one more thing about another thing that didn't happen when we were here is Lakewood Ranch. Okay, do you know that Lakewood Ranch is the fastest growing community in the United States? Did you hear that? That's a horrible idea. What a horrible idea. I'm going to say something pretty subtle. In the old days, cities competed with each other, against each other. The famous St. Louis, Chicago competition that Chicago won and St. Louis lost because Chicago got the railway bridge and St. Louis didn't. That was the beginning. And the competition of so many cities that have been won and lost. Cities used to compete with each other. Now cities compete with their own suburbs. Just refocus on that. And let's make it personal, okay? If you come to open a shop, or if you come to build a building, like an office building, or you come to, let's say, inhabit a house, the suburbs are all set up to be, they're all pre-permitted, and that's what's called a master development. Do you realize the guys out there in Lakewood, everything's really pre-permitted. If you're a developer and you want to build 50 houses, you read the very thin little rules that have been boiled down, because the person who went to get that overall permit, that person went through hell, through permitting hell. But the actual builder is very simple. And I've done it. You go in and you read the little rules and you say, this is my plan, and you have a cup of coffee and 2 hours you're out. Okay, that's what happens. And the same thing in an office building, in an office park. And the same thing is you want to open a shop, you have a knitting shop. You don't have to go downtown and talk to the fire marshal who thinks, well, does yarn burn? Well, let's just sprinkler the whole building. How can I torture people that want to be downtown? There's a huge amount of torture. It's completely asymmetrical. Those of you who are downtown and want to develop downtown and open shops downtown really, really love downtown because it's actually irrational, because it's much, 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 much harder. You need to equalize that balance. Okay, you really need to actually make the hurdle of development as light as it is out in the suburb. When you see people suffering getting a permit, that's only the master developer suffering. The actual people that start business and so forth have a very light go. So here for every building, it's the equivalent of permitting the whole Lakewood Ranch. Come meet the traffic engineer, who, by the way, doesn't agree with the landscape architects of the city. And we have several interpretations of the handicap code. And don't forget that actually the hydrology, and this I want to bring up something that is you have to change. You have something called, you're in the south, it's called SwiftMud, Southwest Florida Water Management District. Listen to this. If you have a building here downtown and you improve it up to 50%, if you renovate it, suddenly the water that for 60, 70, 80 years has gone into the storm drainage and taken out, suddenly you have to actually retain it on site. Retain it on site. It can no longer go to what it used to do. And so what happens is, because your site is already filled with parking and everything else and roofed and everything, because the downtown sites are really built up, you are actually causing people to do things like build a swimming pool underneath the parking lot. Incredibly expensive. Somebody told me that there's a new restaurant out there that just got built. Oh no, it was something else. Actually, it was the renovation of a warehouse. And it would have cost $50,000 to renovate an abandoned warehouse. Would have cost $50,000 because suddenly the water had to actually stay there instead of go off somewhere else where it's been going off. Those codes were written for greenfield development. The codes were written for out there. Okay, for the new communities that actually, as you know, have retention and detention, they've got the land to do it. They're being misapplied in this water management district all over the Southwest. And you have to, Fort Myers, the same thing, all of them, you have got to lead the revolution and throw off that, because that wasn't the intention of the legislation. The urban areas can retain the existing hydrology. Because if not, it is a nightmare, okay? And the only reason you can renovate buildings here is that the value is so high that actually you can afford to do that stupid waste of money. But that also makes the housing more affordable. And that is something that just needs to be done drastically. And other cities, now don't ask me who's done it, I believe that Winter Park has done it, but other cities have done it, and you've got to get that for your downtown, okay? Because otherwise, you're just wasting money. A huge amount of money, $50,000 to do a parking lot. That makes no difference to the parking lot. You're just putting pipes underneath and digging it up and putting it out. So that I would urge you to something to do. That's something that this generation can do. And what that will allow, because that's so difficult, you know what happens here? Does anybody ever develop one lot? No. They have to buy the lot next door and the lot next door and the lot next door, minimum 1 acre. I don't look at anything that isn't 1 acre. So you have a very finely grained old downtown, and you're forcing all the developers of downtown to buy huge tracts of land, which actually destroy the small grain and actually creates a city that actually is much more coarse, much bigger buildings that are wider and so forth. And the worst part is because you see a single lot cannot really be developed. That what you're doing is actually disincentivizing all the small builders, which i.e. are the young builders. No one can actually develop a lot here. They have to be a big deal company that can sustain not only the purchase of the 4 or 5 lots, but can hire the consultants, pay the extra underground pipes, and by the way, pay for 2 years of owning that land while you get a permit. Today somebody was telling me a story. They wanted one single thing decided. And you may have seen me actually, I was doing like this, I was actually counting. And I realized that permit was just one permit for something, took longer than D-Day to the fall of Berlin. It's completely ridiculous. Okay, just get it out of the way. And if you want young people to be active as developers and keep something that has much greater semblance, because actually I believe that side of Sarasota, I think it's that side, the south side, I think it is, still has a little urban fabric, charming urban fabric, right? It's still charming down there. Just to renovate these damn little things, you have to go through hell. Just make it easier and this is something that can be an agenda. What would it take to make it easier for a smaller, therefore younger developer to fix their dwelling? And then you get a much more active and I would say exciting kind of development, okay? Development here is really pretty good. Like these buildings are nice. This is a terrific building. The apartments look good. Your architects are good, okay? But nothing's doing anything. Nobody's doing anything small. It's always big. And I think that's part of the disappointment. I think you're actually sweating out the taller buildings a lot. The really important part is how the building meets the road. Okay, it's how the meeting. One of the things about Palm, it's amazingly good how continuous your urban fabric is. Your shops, and Main Street, of course, goes without saying. It's fantastic. Okay, what's really important for pedestrian life is how the building meets the road. Okay, the sidewalk. It makes a difference whether a building's 3 stories. There's a kind of 3-story town that's absolutely charming. Walk-ups, you've seen it. Georgetown, a lot of the old New England. And then there's the 8 stories, which is like the Back Bay in Boston, okay? But after 8 stories, it doesn't matter if you're 16. That's so far up that it actually doesn't make a difference. So if you want to notch it at 3, okay. And if you want to notch it at 8, okay. But 12, 14, who cares? I mean, really, honestly, from the point of view of the town, from the point of view of the pedestrian, what happens up there just doesn't. You might have a better silhouette from the sailboats, but just don't sweat out the small incremental raises or lowerings, okay? You can battle that, but it's not an important battle. But fight to the death for a continuous urban fabric below. Don't let them gap the urban fabric with entrances to garages. Don't let them gap with dumpsters. Those gaps will actually destroy the pedestrian flow. And I could go on and on about things like that. Like, for example, parking doesn't have to be near the destination. That's suburbia. Parking is better some distance from the destination because then you shop. You actually see the online stores, just like a mall, where they separate the anchor stores, right? So people go from one to the other. This idea that parking has to be right there, don't move my parking has to be right in front, no. You do need parking on the street because it protects the pedestrian. Okay, that layer of parallel parking is what makes you feel fine as a pedestrian. Wherever you don't have it, it's very unpleasant. Okay, that's it. It's not so much that it slows down the cars, although it does. What happens is the layer of, and of course, nobody that parks in front is going to go to that store. Okay, that's not why you do it. What you're doing is protecting. So don't, in fact, anything, if you were to retrofit your 2 big streets, T-O-O, some of your streets are too big and too fast. If you retrofit them with parking, cars will slow up and the pedestrians will come back. Because there's a hotel just down there that was shown to me today. And they said, well, the first floor retail is terrible. Right, it just doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. The sidewalk's 5 feet wide, and the cars are going past at 40 miles an hour. There's nothing you can put in there that will survive because there are no pedestrians there. It's not the fault of the hotel. It's the fault of the absence of parking. And that's why we had A and B streets. We said, when you have an A street, which you call primary streets now, really you've got to get it right. You get the whole section right from the clear glass that allows you to see what's happening in the shop, the right landscaping, the parked car, the lanes that are a correct width so the cars move just right in speed, etc., including the timing of the lights. The whole thing is one design. And right now, you have a lot of specialties in your specialists in your planning department that don't agree. And so what happens is that every developer has to resolve what's called has to be the agent of intragovernmental coordination. That's the word. Because it's astonishing. If you try to get a permit, the fire marshal says no, the other guy says yes, and you should resolve it internally. I think you should actually get your planner, name a boss person, city manager, whoever you want, and say, you're all sitting on this table and coming up with a single story about all the things that are causing problems, the sprinklers, the parking, the location, whatever is not fully coordinated, okay? That has to be coordinated. The government owes that to people. Okay, now this is a pretty interesting kind of red. It's a red place. You don't like your government to subsidize. Okay, you're not the worst, but you don't. Fine, don't subsidize the developers, but then government has to get out of the way. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, we don't do public-private partnerships because we believe in the private sector, and the government is preventing the private sector. You've got to get the government out. That's part of the deal. You keep the government in there with the impediments, then you've got to subsidize the developers because it takes too long, and it's too difficult, and it's too expensive. You can't have it both ways, okay? You've got to get fast permits, clear codes, and that's it. And then you don't have to subsidize anybody because this place is so valuable already. You have to try very hard to make things to fail. By now in Sarasota, this is not going to fail. You're distorting and making it too expensive and not young enough as a city. Which, by the way, eventually you're going to find out you're kind of not cool. Sarasota's fine, but really, it's not cool enough. And that happens. I've seen it happen. It's just not cool. You've got to keep up with the culture. That's enough. Okay. Questions? Did I cover everything? No, I didn't. I said most of what needed to be said.
First question. The city wants pedestrians but provides no shade or room for them to walk. Buildings 18-story to the street do not replace shade. What is the plan?
A city that is continually shaded is a rarity, okay? And you can plant trees and the tropical trees do provide, they tend to have, the northern trees do like that. The southern trees are very well equipped to do that. I understand that you ask developers to replant the trees they killed, but you allow them to actually plant very small trees, okay? And I think you should actually, given the profits that they're making, and I'm very pro-profit, but frankly, it is you who is making this a very profitable endeavor to be a developer. Ask for the biggest, best trees right from the beginning. The other thing you can do is do arcades, but they're kind of out of date compared to awnings. The really cool places, essentially when you think about it, are not the arcaded ones, they're the awning ones. So I would say not to do that. Now, if you were to design a new town, you could actually create asymmetrically north, south, and east-west streets that actually, they're absolutely designed to shade each other. Do you see what I'm saying? But that's too late here. The provision of shading. So I would say trees are your best bet. Make sure you get them large enough and plant them correctly so they thrive. Because there's a lot of really lousy planting technique that keeps the tree small forever. And I think oaks are the way to go because they survive hurricanes, actually. It's not that hard, but just plant more trees. And that's all I can say. I don't agree that tall buildings don't provide shade. I think they actually do, but not everywhere because the plan was not designed to put, let's say, an asymmetrical street is the tall building on the south side of the street and the tall building on the west side of the street. and then it actually shades the whole street. Do you see what I mean? But it's too late. They weren't thinking about that. I think breeze is more important. And I was going to say one more thing, actually, which I meant. The Sarasota school gave this place a brand. And if you leave and come back, you realize that it's still active, that people are still designing a kind of sober, elegant, simple modernism. Okay, no ornament. That you may or may not code. Okay, you don't have to write a code. But if you say generally that you expect your architectural expression to be shade and breeze, okay? You know what our style is? You know what our style is? Shade and breeze. Okay, so don't start inventing other stuff that you saw in a magazine. Where's your shade? Where's your breeze? Come up to hearings and say, I think it's an ugly building. No. That is your opinion. The architect thinks it's beautiful. Okay? Where's your shade? Where's your breeze? Show me where that is. And there will be not only more shade and breeze, there'll be an aesthetic convergence. Okay? And you'll converge. One of the things that I know you need badly is anybody who makes a deeper balcony, instead of just a 3-foot. If anybody comes in and says, let me make a deeper balcony, even if I have to reach the level of the street. Right now, there's a kind of setback that wasn't intended. Just say, by all means, deeper balconies are welcome, okay? And if anybody says, I'm going to leave a gap between 2 buildings, give me 2 more floors. Because actually, I can build from building to building, but if I can go higher 2 feet, I'll stay back. Breeze. Breeze comes in, you see? So that is the reason to actually say 2 more floors, but more breeze. Always trade, but you got to be clear about what you want. You want breeze and shade, breeze and shade, breeze and shade, breeze and shade. And the architect will converge. They want to get your permit. And so you're really more powerful than you think. By the way, you can't really deny them a permit, but you can take longer.
Are there examples of cities successfully addressing their unhoused population in the downtown? And don't say San Francisco.
This is a problem you don't have to speak of, but you might. You might have that problem. Obviously, anybody who's in this profession has read a lot about the technique. Every society since the Assyrians had homeless, okay? And the homeless were allocated to every village. You can see the almshouses in the small villages in Europe. You can see them. There's always an almshouse, 4 little houses, 10 little houses. Bruges has several. They're beautiful little houses for people. The problem is not the homeless, which is inevitable, it's the concentration of the homeless, okay? And that is the problem. They tend to converge in places that sometimes have no problem at all. Out there in the breeze by the ocean, right? Fine. But they want to be near where the cafe is. And then the people who help them give them the sandwiches at the cafe. And so they all behave and they all come. I'm speaking about a problem they have right now in Vero Beach. They've chosen the best tree in the best location, and everybody comes to bring them food there. And it was fine when there were 6, but now there's 26. And I think it's a concentration problem. I don't think that we know yet how to eliminate poverty at that level. And many of them actually don't want to go to the housing that's provided. They really don't. They're incredibly free spirits, and it's pretty unpleasant, those houses sometimes. When you get thrown out, you have to pack every day. So I would say, try to disperse, let them be everywhere, but lightly. And one of the ways to do it, we did this in Providence, is there's one place to get food in the morning, and then at lunch, it's 1.5 miles away, and then at dinner, it's 1.5 miles away. You see, and then the housing is 1.5 miles away. So they walk, and they don't walk in a pack. They spend all morning dispersed, and they do different things. And so that's one way that in Providence, people have spread a little bit. We still don't have the money to eliminate that. It's bigger than your job, but it's the concentration that bothers. But I met a few, and they're not trouble. No, they're just not.
So do you have another problem you want to invent?
So we've had quite a few questions about wanting your viewpoint, obviously, with your experience here and your perspective, with the taller buildings along 41 especially, that has very narrow sidewalks, very little setback.
Which side of 41? The ocean
both,
side?
really, but yeah, mostly on the
I
Gulf
think,
side.
okay, so there's 41. Am I correct in saying that 41 is that kind of mess that I
Yes.
alluded to earlier? And then the other side is Palm Avenue, right? No. Where's the other side of 41? I mean, the condos have a Palm Avenue side, right? Or not? Essentially, they do. It's that block you're talking about. By the way, that block is one block from there to there. I think the block Palm Avenue is pretty nice.
No, I think
It's one of the nicer places, you know. That's not a narrow sidewalk. And by the way, it does everything right. The parking is there. The cars move slowly. You have a lot of continuity, very few gaps with the shops, very few gaps.
So just north of there at the larger roundabout over to Lido, as we move north with the view and into the quay and further up, the sidewalks are quite narrow and the buildings are quite tall.
I agree. And one other thing about in those days when we did the planning, we did a lot of listening to the elected officials. Actually to the planning department. And they loved roundabouts, which were pioneering at the time. They'd just come over from Australia. They were controversial. They were fantastic. They were avant-garde. We didn't know that they were bad. And even if we did, we would have done it because the planning department wanted. Roundabouts don't stop traffic. Okay, roundabouts and circles are actually, they give priority to the traffic. What stops traffic is the red light, okay? If I were to come up with a very simple rule, I say every intersection should have a traffic light. And the cycle should be no more than 1 minute. 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And what happens is that the cars don't stack up very much and the people on the sidewalk don't wait very much. Because there's a kind of agony to waiting 2-3 minutes. So if there were to be one rule, even if you already have roundabouts, you need your traffic signals there. You know, because the traffic keeps flowing. Today I was all over town and I did several roundabouts and they weren't that safe. You know, yes, I wasn't killed, here I am. But it wasn't like crossing on a red light. And I first noticed this in, of all places, Colorado Avenue in Pasadena, which is enormous. It's a really wide street, but by God, every 30 seconds. When I arrived at the corner of Colorado Avenue, I never had to wait more than 30 seconds. And the cars never had to stack more than 30 seconds. The terrible thing is how much is the agony of the wait. I would try that. Oh, one more thing I was gonna say when you try things. Instead of talking about it for 16 months, like, you know, D-Day to Berlin, okay? Why don't you just try it with a provision that unless it is continued, it sunsets. Okay, so you say, we're gonna try this. We're gonna try this damn thing. We're gonna see. And let's just try it instead of talking about it. And if we don't vote it in something like 30 months, you gotta go through 2 seasons, right? Because the first time everybody's unhappy because something's changed. You gotta go past that unhappiness and then you say, and if we don't expressly vote it in, it just sunsets. So it's a very small experiment. And by the way, there's much less contentiousness because I did hear that people they're on both sides of things. You know, I heard that several times. You're on both sides of things, but I can't remember what the things are because they're so minor, but you're on both sides of them. Just try it. Just try it. That's the way to do it. Like in my office, we always try things. And by the way, we try to make them work. Okay? You do your best to make them work. You don't do your best so that they fail. And then you pull them out. And I would suggest that as a matter of policy, you say, we're going to go through that phase. Let's try it for 30 months. See what happens. Just see it.
Thank you so much, Andres. Let's give him a warm